Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Gary Ware. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It gives you the tools and inspiration to make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. This is where we explore how to cultivate remarkable cultures that scale and evolve as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
One of the reasons why I titled my book Playful Rebellion is that I noticed, especially myself, the more knowledge that I got about this area and how it benefits us, it did not help me execute. It did not help me implement. And I actually had to rebel against my sort of conditioning. And that became a game in and of itself. And so to model what I mean, before I start to give very specific things that you can do, and same for you, I'd like to invite you to cross your arms. Cross your arms in a way that is normal and natural. Just go ahead and cross your arms. And notice what hand is on top and what hand's on bottom. So that is your, what is called homeostasis. Now I'd like to invite you to cross it the opposite way. So the opposite hand is on top. And so some of you might be struggling to do this, but once you get there, you'll notice that it doesn't feel right. Something feels off. That is the dissonance. That is your body trying to get you to go back to the way that feels normal and natural. So I want you to notice that when you start to put some of these things into play, is that it may feel a little bit odd, and that is normal.
Hey friends, welcome to episode 133 of the Culture Lab podcast. This episode is brought to you by Culture Brain, a one-of-a-kind accelerator program where culture leaders get hands-on support and guidance on how to reach their goals faster, especially now in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. Culture Brain connects you with outstanding peers on the same journey, but also with world-class experts, including people you know from the show. And they all help you identify and implement new, better ways of creating a culture where people do their best work. Check it out at tinyurl.com/culturebrain. And no need to write it down. There's a link in the show notes. So I have a question for you. When was the last time you were genuinely playful at work? I'm guessing it might have been a while. Most of us have been conditioned to believe that work and play don't really mix. Not only were we taught to draw a clear demarcation line between work and play, we're also convinced that work is somehow way more noble and more important than play. But what if I told you that truly great work can't really happen without a healthy dose of play? What if I told you that unless we can have fun with the work we're doing itself, at least occasionally, we can't really achieve greatness? Well, this is what I've discovered in my research. I asked thousands of people in the past decade or so to tell me about a time they did their best work. And almost every story I heard was a story of three key elements that we seem to need to thrive at work: fun, meaning, and belonging. Which is why I'm so excited to share today's conversation with Gary Ware, the founder of Breakthrough Play, a keynote speaker, and the author of the book Playful Rebellion: Maximize Workplace Success Through the Power of Play. Gary assists teams with unlocking creativity, confidence, and collaboration via experiential methods that drive peak performance. He discovered that combining work and play could be a powerful solution to a lot of intractable problems and challenges we grapple with at work. In this conversation, Gary talks about the relationship of workplace productivity and play. He talks about play as the driver of innovation and performance. Very interesting thing that I had no idea existed: the 8 play personalities and how we can integrate purposeful play into our workday. So, with no further ado, here is my guest, Gary Ware.
My name is Gary Ware. I run a small little company called Breakthrough Play, where it's my mission to use applied improvisation and playful methods as a transformation tool, just to help individuals and teams be the best versions of themselves.
Gary, welcome to the Culture Lab.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you here. And I'll kick it off with the same question I ask each of our guests, which is what were the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person? In other words, how did you grow up and what impact did it have on who you are today?
Thinking back, if we were to wind the clock back, my father, he was in the Navy. So that did mean a little bit of moving. I was born in the United States in Missouri in a bigger city called Kansas City. But because my dad was in the Navy, we ended up moving to Hawaii and then finally landing in California, in San Diego specifically. And that sort of bouncing around, I feel like has like a big influence in my life because it's all about sort of readjusting. Like, oh, we're in a new place. All right. How do we readjust? It's all about acclimating yourself to like the environment. Once we were settled in San Diego, so my parents, they are very big on education and, they wanted their kids to get the best education that they could, better than they were afforded growing up. So my mom specifically was so specific about learning. And I know that I was at a different school, it seems like every year until fourth grade because my mom just wasn't having it. She was like, "No, no, this school is not up to par. You are already reading. It's all this other stuff." So again, it's an ongoing theme of Gary being in a new environment, Gary figuring out what's up, adjusting and adapting. So one of the things that I guess looking back, it could be a superpower and in some cases just a hindrance is I like to say that I am a social chameleon. I know how to like figure out like, oh, all right, cool. I understand what's up with this environment. How do I need to show up here? In my work, a lot of times I talk about attunement, getting in rapport, with individuals so that you can sort of bond and grow. And yeah, that was just something that I had to do by necessity and definitely helped me. So that was my early years. The other things that was sort of influenced me, and when we talk about like my book and whatnot, I'll mention this a little bit more. I was just a happy go lucky kid. Growing up, we didn't have a lot of diagnosis for stuff that we have now. But I have, since becoming an adult, been diagnosed with ADHD. As a kid growing up, it was one of those things where teachers were like, all right, sit down, this, that, and the other. And my dad realizing, like, yeah, all right, I want my son, again, going back to good education. I wanted to be successful in life. And for my parents, it all started with being educated. And so his contract with me that helped me up until like I graduated college was, hey, you can play and have fun once you finish the work. And that sort of contract was helpful for like a sort of hyperactive social butterfly kid like myself because I had structure. It was like, all right, I wanted to do this thing. I knew that I couldn't do it. So it was sort of like practicing delayed gratification. It helped me hyper focus, get the work done so I can do this thing that I wanted to do. And that was just like my operating procedure. And in a structured environment like school, it was very helpful.
Yeah, sure. And I can totally relate to that because I come from a similar family, I guess, where there was a huge emphasis on getting good education. And actually, this phrase that your parents used with you can play when you finish your work, is the phrase of my childhood as well. And, I really wonder, I think that a lot of people grew up this way. And I wonder how does it shape our relationship with play when we grow up, right? But we can talk about this later, but it's a really interesting theme right here. But I'm curious, what was your relationship with play as you were growing up? How did that change? I understand that as a kid, you knew that sort of work and play don't really mix well, and you should keep them separate. And then I imagine at some point you joined the workforce. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So my relationship with play was like, I loved it. And thinking back on all the research on play and my own experience, yeah, it's true. This is where all the relationships were made. This is where a lot of growth happened. So again, going from school to school to school, that's where I made my friends. I knew it was like on the playground. You go out to recess. I, at a young age, learned how to like spot. It's like, all right, those are people like me. All right, I need to go find those folks that are playing the games that I like to play, and just sort of going in. It's like, hey, you want to play? And it's interesting because as kids, it's that simple. to make friends. Hey, do you want to play? And we start playing. But as adults, and again, we'll get into this, it becomes challenging. We need more opportunity. So I love playing all kinds of play. And growing up, and I'm still this way. I'm very much a jokester.
I can see that. I can see the sparkle in your eyes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So I'm very much a jokester in that I like to pranks and have fun, and it's all in good fun. It's never meant to be sort of hurtful or anything like that. Yeah, that was just like how I operated. We played outside growing up, and then eventually we got video games, and I like that as well. The relationship with play was always something that had to be earned, which again, looking back, I was like, oh, now I know why I have so much challenges that I have now. But yes.
And again, I think a lot of our listeners grew up in a similar way with similar boundaries. I read in your book that you started your career in a startup, and I think it was a marketing agency, right? And you talk about this experience of being employee number 23. And actually, a lot of our listeners come from startups or scale ups, and they do have that experience where at the very beginning, it's almost palpable. Everything that you do is so much fun. And there's usually so much joy and spontaneity. And then, of course, as the company grows and scales, it changes. And it was your experience as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about this journey and how that led you, if it led you, to the path that you've arrived at recently?
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. It was exciting. We were building something, we were very scrappy, and it was extremely playful. We were working very hard, and at the same time, we were having a lot of fun. But see, here's the challenge, that we'll dive into this, but I just wanna sort of preface this with this: we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't know, like, the essence of what was making us sort of bond. But yeah, we had, you know, um, we had, like, it wasn't necessarily beer on tap, but, like, we had a fridge full of supplies and snacks and stuff like that. We as a small unit, hung out together, after work, and it wasn't like a forced thing. It's like, yeah, we worked really hard. And we're like, hey, what do we want to do? So we were all somewhat around the same age. We all had similar interests, and it was a lot of fun. The work that we did was very challenging. We're doing large, multi-million dollar marketing programs for some of the largest companies in the world. And those clients weren't necessarily the easiest to work with. However, we had each other, and we actually created little games. Like, we had a client that was just the hardest to work with. And we were on these conference calls, like, yeah, pre Zoom. So this on the phone. I'm glad it was pre Zoom.
Hmm.
Is on the phone, and the client is berating us, and all these other things. And we had like a little bingo card, because this client would love to say like these hip words and whatnot, seemingly to to sound smart. And every time, one of those phrases were said, like, we'll mark it off, and it's just our
Do
way
you
of just,
remember any? Do you remember any of these
oh my
words
gosh, yeah,
still?
peaks and valleys, peaks and they would say that all the time. Tell me about the peaks and valleys. We were like, oh my gosh, really? And then and optimization was a big one. Granted, that's what we did. We
Hmm.
optimized, but like peaks and valleys was their like was their catchphrase. Like, it was always about the peaks and valleys. Um,
Uh-huh.
so, anyways, yeah, we had this bingo card, and then if we filled the card, which happened a good like 90% of the time, uh, we celebrated, after
Mm.
work, shots and all. So, but yeah, that was the culture. And then naturally, we grew. And as we grew, since this was a startup, it was a venture-backed company. Eventually, having investors and whatnot, the investors are like, all right, so, what are you going to become? What are you going to grow into? And, the company, decided, oh yeah, we need to quote unquote grow up. And I mentioned this in the book. Um, and I remember this just like it was yesterday. They had this, leadership considered this like a sort of like a almost like a rebranding, and is trying to get like our sort of voice out, into the market. And at the time we had all of these inspirational words that were our values and whatnot all over the office, and each one had, a picture and it had the word, and they said, "Hey, we're consolidating our values down to a few." And fun was one of the values, and they took it off the wall. I remember it like it was like yesterday. They took fun off the wall, and that was like almost like foreshadowing of what was to come, because we got very serious. And some of the words that stayed was excellence. Now, don't get me wrong, I always strive for excellence, but there was something about, again, going back to when I was younger, of, you know what, save that sort of mischief and whatnot till after the work is done. And we got extremely serious. The workload, in my opinion, got even more so, but we didn't have that outlet that we had when we were playful. So this is where burnout started to happen. We started to lose, key members of the team. And again, these things happen. Like, again, I didn't know what I know now, but I just saw it as like just what we do, hey, yeah, we're growing up, so it's just going to come with getting serious. And yeah, people are going to leave and they're going to go find other things. And then I thought this burnout was just par for the course. Matter of fact, I remember being at networking events, and we all are using like how much we're working as a badge of honor. Almost like, how can we one up each other? It's like, oh, you think you worked hard? Oh, no, no, let me tell you about working hard. And
Hmm.
and yeah, and I would again finally have time to go on a vacation, and not really enjoying it because my body's recuperating. And it's funny, I remember as we were growing, me and my wife, we were like finally on a vacation, like, we went to New York, and I got called on that vacation, that we were going through another sort of restructure, and we had to I had to have a business meeting on the vacation. And again, this happens, but it was just
Mm.
with this company that I work for. It was, you know, it was like, fun. You're gonna still work, so it was very challenging to step away. And again, I just thought that's just how it was. And so I didn't really know much about like the symptoms of burnout and stuff like that. I didn't realize how burnt out I was until I took an improv class. So that was like the thing that started to change my perception, and get me to realize that, oh, play is something that is not something that you earn; it's something that you can do. That you should have. It's your right, and matter of fact, it helps all sort of situations. So the funny thing is, I didn't take this improv class like as a like outlet, like, oh, I want to have fun. It was in service of my job. Uh, as an up and coming director, I knew one of the skill sets that I need to have. I needed to be better at public speaking. Here in the States, we have a thing called Toastmasters, and it's great at building a foundation for public speaking. They teach you structure. It's awesome. It just wasn't something that allowed me to feel authentically me. I felt like a robot, and so,
Hmm.
but I still wanted to get
Yeah,
better.
these meetings are super structured. I actually had joined Toastmasters when I lived in Cyprus. And I was shocked because I've never seen meetings that were so structured. So I think you're totally right. And I have to say that I left for the same reason. It was just too rigid for me.
Yeah, too rigid. It's for some uh, people. Oh my gosh, when I mention this in talks and whatnot, people are so upset. They're like, "What do you mean, toast me?" I'm like, it's just not for me. I did learn a lot from it. It just wasn't for me. And I was looking for something else. And a mentor of mine said, "You should take an improv class. I think you would benefit from it." And I was reluctant at first, thinking like, "How's this going to help me?" Again, I'm not trying to be an actor. I don't want to be on Saturday Night Live. I don't want to write sketches. I don't want to be a comedian. I just want to get better at my job, so maybe I can make a little bit more money. But I did it. I signed up.
For the sake of our listeners, for everyone who's not entirely familiar what improv is and how it works, can you just give us a short description of what you do in an improv class?
Yeah. Thank you for that, because I wasn't entirely sure of what I was getting myself into. But basically, what improvisation is, especially the improv that I did, it is essentially thinking on your feet. Improv is in the form that I did, it was theatrical improv, comedic improv. So you would get these prompts and you would have to do activities, spontaneous activities just on the spot. The classes, they help you get better at the muscles and the skills that are needed so that you can do it on a stage with an ensemble, without a script or anything like that. So it's just training you for, being able to do that. A mentor of mine told me that, hey, this sort of training would be great for you, in your job, because again, life is not scripted. Yes, you might have scripted moments, but life is very spontaneous. You have to be able to think on your feet. Improv is all about an ensemble. We often work in groups. Even if you work by yourself, there's still, you have to be good at listening, communicating, and things like that. All this stuff, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Mhm.
I didn't know what I was getting into. I just heard that, yeah, take an improv class, it will be better for you. And again, wanting to get better at what I did, I signed up. The
Mhm.
magic happened on day one. It just blew my mind. And I thought it was just me, but I've had so many folks take an improv class after hearing me talk about it, and they've all like confirmed. What happens is for 2 hours, most improv class, hour, 2 hours. It was a 7 week class. It was 2 hours once a week. And we play these silly games, very silly games. But for 2 hours, I'm completely captivated. I'm completely present. I'm completely focused. And these games are so silly. But we learn these principles that transform outside of the stage. Some principles like embracing mistakes. As a professional, yes, we strive to like not have mistakes, but guess what? Mistakes happen. But how do we deal with it? It's what it's all about. And I know prior to taking an improv class, I would take these things very personally. And it can be something like, we didn't have a good pitch or something like that. And I would just be it just affects me for such a long time, longer than it should, because I take it very personally. And these activities that we do, it's conditioning our brains to realize that no, we can bounce back from these mistakes and we can do it with grace. We can we can take the playful route, and so that's just a small portion of the many lessons that are learned in these classes. But the cool thing is, because I took time to do something that was outside of work, that inherently was playful, that was fun, pleasurable, whatever the case may be. Like it started to rejuvenate me. Like I went home and I was just so excited, so happy. And my wife thought I was drunk, thought I had been out drinking. I hadn't. Uh, she didn't believe me at first. But I was just so happy and excited, and this was something that I got to do every week, and I wanted to do more of it. So I was just hooked. I didn't immediately see all the benefits, but I did see how these activities started to translate to my day to day, and I started bringing them as a new and up and coming leader. I wanted to engage my team, so I started bringing them to meetings. I started bringing them to my teams to do before we had a stressful pitch, after stressful pitch, on Fridays. I just would bring these games, and I started bringing that play back to our environment, and that's when things started to shift.
That's amazing. It's really fascinating to me because I've mentioned that this to you when we first spoke. I've done some primary research, and basically, it was all founded in one question that I asked people. And the question was, tell me about a time you did your best work. And we analyzed this data, doing qualitative analysis of the interviews, and themes started to emerge. And this is how I landed on the three pillars of thriving cultures. And one of them is fun. But it's really about the joy of work itself and the playfulness and the co creation, not the fun that we tend to associate with Netflix binge watching or, Facebook scrolling. But the fun that you talked about in the early days of your startup. Now, when I talk about these ideas, the most vehement resistance that I experience is around this pillar of fun. And people have a really negative reaction to it. And I can only imagine that partially it's social conditioning and our culture. We talked a little bit about how we were conditioned by our parents to keep play and work separate. And it's really interesting that you had this aha moment when you brought in play into work. And it seems like initially it was just based on your personal experience. But I know that now you've been really deep into the topic. So channeling the skeptics who are listening to this and thinking, this all sounds crazy, and I really don't see how it could help my team to be effective. What is the science behind play as a driver of performance or innovation in the workplace?
I think we need to sort of separate a few things. The thing that we're talking about right here is doing our best work, performance. So let's, take activities and stuff and set it aside. We can replace play with another word, flow. Researcher Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow. And when you're in the state of flow, you are being challenged just enough. Time goes by like that. You're fully engaged, fully immersed in the experience. And I'll ask, leaders, wouldn't you want that for your team? Wouldn't you want your team to be immersed in their work where it feels like time is just going by and they are, again, doing the best work? I've asked tons and tons of leaders and they've all said yes. So I said, okay, cool. So let's just remember that. We all want that for our teams. Now I would like you to think about a time when you were playing a game, when you were playful. What was that like? I bet you it was very similar to what I described as flow. And that's the thing with play is that you're in this state where again, you're fully immersed, you are being challenged, just enough, you're engaged, you're interacting. Here's the thing is that it's also pleasurable. It's fun. And so how can we get that mindset, take that playful mindset and put it into the work? You had a guest, Lindsay McGregor. She was talking about the intrinsic motivators and play again is one of them. And so what we're talking about here is how can we get our teams to see the work as play where, we're met with challenges, we're overcoming them, and we're completely immersed in the experience.
Yeah, this is so important. I really appreciate you pulling out these various pieces of research. So, one is around play is really the most powerful intrinsic motivator for people. And I remember my conversation with Lindsay when she asked me actually about the things that I do for fun. And back then we were learning to dance tango. And she started asking me these questions like, why do you do that? Is someone paying you? Or, have you set a goal or something like that? And of course, eventually you realize, oh my gosh, really, the things that I'm most committed to and are most enjoyable. You do this for the joy of the activity itself. So this is really interesting. And obviously, Csikszentmihalyi research as well. I think most of our listeners are familiar with that. And clearly, all of those things are the things that we'd like to see more of in the workplace and would like to be able to leverage. And yet, I know that it's quite difficult. And I think, one of the reasons is the resistance that we talked about. For some reason, we feel like play is this frivolous thing that doesn't produce the numbers that we need to hit. What other obstacles are there that make this so hard to accomplish at work?
I think one of the main things is our mindset, it's our social conditioning. We have been conditioned, as we talked about in the beginning of this conversation, that play is something that should not mix with work. They're two separate things. And when you see play through a single small little lens of like maybe goofing off or something like that, it's challenging to see it for what it's worth. Something that is deep ingrained in our psyche and we're wired for it, and something that can help us bring out the best of our work. So that's the first thing, just conditioning and mindset. If we can shift that, then we can really unlock all the benefits. So it brings me back to the work of Jane McGonigal, who wrote the book Super Better. She's a researcher and she was researching the benefit of, she was focusing mostly on video games, but the research is conclusive across the board of all types of play. And she said the difference. So the people that reap the benefits of play and use it to thrive and to grow and all these things, it's all about how they perceive the action. If you perceive the action as something that you are suppressing things, you're using it to escape, then it will become a detriment because then that habit becomes something you do to avoid doing something else. And that's how most people, see it as, oh, we are
Like, for
goofing
example,
off,
binge watching Netflix,
right?
right? That
Yeah.
would be an example of that.
Yeah. But yeah, especially if your mindset is like, I don't want to do work. I don't want to have to go to work
Right.
tomorrow. I'm just going to just, then yeah, you're not going to reap the benefits. But I will tell you this, it goes for anything. Your intention when you go and do any activity can be positive or negative. The same can go for potentially exercise. What if your view on working out is like, I'm just working out as like a crutch because I don't want to deal with these challenging emotions. I don't want to have to go to, then it's not necessarily going to benefit you, the way that it can. And so it blew a lot of things open for me. So that's where I started working with leaders to say, how can we change our intention when we're thinking about these activities and realize that they have a benefit?
Is that what you are referring to as purposeful play?
Yes. Yes. Yes, exactly. Ding, ding, ding.
Okay, tell me more.
Yeah. And so, how can we create rituals? How can we create moments that are going to get us in the state that we need to be in so that we can do our best work? Just going back to what we did before we started recording, we got ourselves primed for this interview. We did a quick little activity and it boosted our spirits. It got us focused so that we can, jump into the interview, be connected.
We learned a lot about each other, by the way, which like in literally a minute.
Yeah, a minute. And what's happening here under the hood, our body is producing what I call the DOSE, DOSE, which is dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. Those are the neurochemicals that we need to do our best work. The opposite of that, so that is what some will call the angel's cocktail. The opposite of that is the devil's cocktail, which is adrenaline and serotonin. To be honest, that is what most people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Why is that? What are the things that trigger these hormones?
When you see, so adrenaline and serotonin, first let me tell you the side effects of that. When you have that for long periods of time, it will result in burnout, fatigue, all of those negative things that is not going to allow you to do your best work. And so what triggers that, because our brains are prehistoric, they're the same brains, they operate exactly the same, just like before we had technology and all this. So when we open an email and we are like upset about what's going to happen, our brains are wired exactly the same as if we were being attacked by something. The difference is it stays with us. We don't have a way to sort of release that. And so the adrenaline and the cortisol is just flowing through our bodies, makes us make rash decisions. We have short term memory loss. We're very sort of fragile and irritated. And again, play is the antidote of that. And so that helps us, again, get back into that state of focus. But most people are running on, just straight adrenaline and cortisol. And we think that's just how it is. But as a result, we're going to get tired quicker. Another thing us humans we're not good at judging our ability to work based on our tiredness. And we probably heard the phrase, oh, I'm just going to power through. Well, guess what? Powering through probably means you're going to work longer than you probably should because you're making more mistakes. You're not as focused. You're not as attentive. So, what would you rather have?
Makes total sense to me. And now I'm super eager to hear how can we implement that at
Yes.
work? What's interesting is if we could talk a little bit about what each of our listeners can do to become, as you call it, a play rebel at work individually. But I also want us to explore what can leaders do. A lot of our listeners are leaders who are managing teams. And I'd like to pick your brain also on this topic. Like, what can a leader do to create an environment where play is truly embraced as part of the workflow, and the process of accomplishing great results. So yeah, just take it from whichever point makes sense for you.
So first, I'm going to start with a quick story that is related, but it's tangential. So I'm a parent. I have two beautiful boys. One that is 6, going on 7, and then the other is 17 months. And me and my wife, we want the best for them. We want them to grow up to be kind human beings and a great contributor to society. And there are often times when we parents, if you're listening, you can probably relate to this, where we are not necessarily in integrity with the things that we want. But here's the thing:
Happens.
it happens. Like, we just have to be honest. It happens. Kids are sponges. They're always picking up, whether they're conscious or not, and then oftentimes model the behavior that they see rather than what we tell them to do. Case in point, we were trying to get my son to get up early, or just to get up. Yes, cool.
Mhm.
Is just to get up. And I remember where he was like, "Well, you don't." Like, there was a time, like, again, he noticed, like, we didn't wanna get up. We were just like, a little sluggish. And in that moment, we realized that our actions are influencing our children's behavior. And then we immediately was like, "All right, we need to do better. We need to, start to model the behavior that we want our kids to have." And so, bringing it back to leaders, that's the first thing. You could be watching this or listening to this and be like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I want this for my team." However, if you are not willing to practice it, to model it, it is not going to happen with your team. Because I know firsthand, being on both sides of the spectrum, being an individual contributor and a leader, that you can have the best sort of intentions. However, if the people who are in charge are not following these things, it's going to be so challenging for everyone else.
Yeah, so true.
That's the first thing. And so, as a leader, you have to be willing to be vulnerable with this, realizing that, "Ugh, I'm not good at this, but I want what's best for my team, and I want what's best, for myself." That's step number 1.
Yeah. So when we talk about individuals, then including leaders, because they need to role model these behaviors, and let's say that people do want to embrace some of these practices and go against the grain of the industrial model that tells us all the time you need to power through, and eventually, of course, we end up burnt out. What's a better way, and what are some of the practices that you know that work for people?
One of the reasons why I titled my book "Playful Rebellion" is that I noticed, especially myself, the more knowledge that I got about this area and how it benefits us, it did not help me execute. It did not help me implement. And I actually had to rebel against my sort of conditioning. And that became a game in and of itself. And so, to model what I mean, before I start to give very specific things that you can do, and same for you, I'd like to invite you to cross your arms in a way that is normal and natural. Just go ahead, and cross your arms, and notice what hand is on top and what hand's on bottom. So that is your what is called homeostasis. Now, I'd like to invite you to cross it the opposite way. So the opposite hand is on top. And so, some of you might be struggling to do this, but once you get there, you'll notice that it doesn't feel right. Something feels off. That is the dissonance. That is your body trying to get you to go back to the way that feels normal and natural. So, I want you to notice that when you start to put some of these things into play, is that it may feel a little bit odd, and that is normal. That's just, we have a way of doing things. We have a default way of doing things. And then when we try to add different systems and stuff like that, we're going to be met with resistance. The first resistance is our own brains, is our minds saying, "No, we've been doing this for so long." And it's so easy to just go back to the way that we've been doing things just because, you've been doing it. But I want to ask you this: do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? That's the first thing, is realizing the resistance that's going to show up. That's why I called it the playful rebellion, is that we have to playfully rebel against our conditioning in hopes of having better cultures. So that's the first thing. And then, leaders, what can you do in small increments? Because one thing that I've practiced myself, and I've learned through a researcher by the name of BJ Fogg, is that things that are done in very small amounts consistently over time become muscle memory.
And they add up. You get this cumulative effect. Yeah.
It hacks our nervous system, it hacks our brain because your brain's like, oh yeah, I can do this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Simple. Yeah, yeah, 5 minutes. All right, cool. And then you do it again and again. And so it's again easier said than done. So how you set that up, I like to call this a recipe. So, what is the thing that you want to tackle? Maybe the simplest thing that I invite all leaders to do is, because we all need more breaks. It refreshes our brain. It helps us get more focused. Again, when we were kids, that's why we had recess. So for you and your team, create a recipe. So recipe, you need a trigger, something to trigger the thought. You need the action, and then you need the celebration. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I invite folks to think about what are those inflection points that you tend to power through when you know that you need a break. And I'm not talking about a long break. It can be as simple as 5 minutes. And so it's as simple as after I blank or after we blank, we will blank because we know it will make us feel blank. We have to add that other part because it needs to be important. We do the things that are priorities. So after, we finish a long meeting, whether it be conference call, Zoom, or whatever, we will take 5 minutes and walk around, or we will take 5 minutes and do a dance break or whatever it is, something playful. Other than don't check your email, don't jump into social media. That does not count. Something that again allows you to step away from the medium. And if you're in person, connect with each other, and even virtually, this is possible as well. But the main thing is to just get your body moving. Again, it's going to give you that dose, and then that's your recipe. And then make sure that after you do it, you celebrate. And it could be as simple as, yes, we did it. Like it's a personal celebration. It doesn't have to be anything like too wild. I know some teams that I've worked with, especially when they're in person, they have like a little cowbell. So after they do it, someone rings the cowbell. Again, that celebration is a reminder to your brain that this is good. When you do that celebration, you get endorphins, you get dopamine. That is that feel good neurochemical in our body that is reminding us that, yeah, we need to do this. So it's as simple as that. That is going to start to put you on the path of becoming a more playful leader.
So developing these tiny habits. And I remember BJ talking about a difficult period in his life when his nephew was really ill and he felt like he couldn't do anything, but he was trying to build his habit of flossing his teeth. And he said, I literally flossed just one tooth for a couple of weeks. This is how tiny these things can be in terms of, how big an action is. But around playfulness, Gary, I'm thinking about myself and I'm thinking about my day at work. I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of creating, but it doesn't always feel very playful. And, if you asked me, I use Pomodoro method, by the way, sometimes, which is basically 25 minutes of work and 5 minutes of break. But I'm not entirely sure if I know what other playful activities I could do in those 5 minutes, apart from something boring like a walk or something like that. How do we tap into what we truly enjoy and that inner child that I'm sure each of us has, and the child knows what it enjoys and what is playful for them. How do we tap into that? How do we learn more about ourselves and what is playful for us, and how we can weave that into our workday?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I thought you would never ask. Dr. Stuart Brown, he's a researcher that studied playful behavior in adults and how it helps us thrive. I like to say he wrote the book on play. He talks about doing a play history. You're absolutely right. We have these things that we have done as a child or whatever the case may be that when we tap into them, they feel like a warm hug. It's, very simple to do that. The easiest thing that you can do is think about like when you were younger, what were the things that brought you joy? Try to get to the essence of it because I'll mention a story in just a moment. But sometimes it's not nearly about doing the exact thing. Sometimes it's what is the root of what that was, and if you can pull that out, you can remix it as an adult, and it can be something that is more beneficial. That when you were looking for something to do in a 5 minute, boom, you have what I call a playlist. So as you're doing this play history, start to journal, start to write some things down. You'll know when you start to get on the right path. One or two things will happen. You'll start to like, oh yeah, yeah. You'll start to get giddy of like thinking about that, like that sort of reminiscence of like, oh yeah, that was fun. I forgot about that. Or you might be like, I don't know if I can do that. Like, should I? Like that is a sign as well that maybe you should explore that. Maybe you should quote unquote play with it. And the playful thinking that I use as a way to make it more approachable is experiment. Because if you think about an experiment is not permanent. An experiment is something that you're just trying to get the results. It's very short term, and if it's working, more of it. If it's not, dump it. So yeah, that's the easiest thing to do. And then whatever you find, figure out how can you incorporate that in different amounts of time. Because if you're doing the Pomodoro method, maybe one of the things that, and this is something that came from me, and so this is me practicing what I preach. Legos was something that I love to do. It was something again me and my dad did, and it wasn't necessarily about building anything per se. It was just the tactile of putting the bricks together. And as you can see right here, it's within her arm's reach is a whole thing of Legos, and I can just take 5 or 10 minutes. And again, I'm just putting some stuff together. I'm not doing anything in particular. It's allowing my brain to sort of just decompress. Then I get back into it.
This is awesome. And when I was thinking about the things that I enjoyed as a kid, I just realized as you were talking that most of the things that brought this sense of playfulness when I was a kid were quite physical. So, it was like hide and seek, for example, where there was the thrill of finding someone or being found, but also a lot of running or like exploring with my cousin, but going on bikes and stuff like that, which is an interesting thing to realize because I spend most of my day sitting down. And so no wonder that sometimes I feel so depleted. And yeah, it's an interesting insight that actually I need more movement throughout the day, not just the workout at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, but probably more movement throughout the day. And yeah, I'll run some experiments around that, what I can do in short intervals of time, like 5 minutes, maybe a little dance or something like that. And I'll let you know how it goes.
Another little tip to that point, as you're uncovering things, you might start to realize that some of the things that bring you joy is maybe not necessarily possible within a short period of time. What I'm getting from you is that for what I heard you say is movement. So yes, incorporating some movement. Going back to Dr. Stuart Brown, he developed these play personalities, and I would just quickly go through them. Matter of fact, I will send a link that if folks are interested, they can download. It has all the play personalities, and you can start to think about like, oh, which one would you maybe want to experiment with, or which ones sort of maybe lead you back to childhood very easily. There's the Joker. The Joker is all about sort of mischief and jokes and whatnot. There's also the Collector. The Collector play for them is collecting experiences, maybe collecting memorabilia. For them, that is fun. That's playful. There's the Competitor. The Competitor is just what you think about, like, hey, someone that really likes to compete. Maybe they like to compete with others. Maybe they like to just compete with themselves. But for them, that is the spirit of play. Then we have the creator slash artist. That a person play for them is creating, maybe not necessarily sharing it with the world, but it's creating a work of art or a poem, or again, creating something with their hands, like Legos and stuff like that. Then we have the director. I like to say my oldest is the director. That's his current dominant play personality. And the director likes to guide others. And they play by planning and executing on those. With my son, when we play, he like, all right, this is how we're gonna play. This is your role. This is what you're gonna do. This is what I'm gonna do. And like that to him, it's fun. And then we have the explorer. And the explorer likes to explore different areas, whether it's through travel or maybe explore through meditation and things like that. Then we have the kinesthetes, which is all about movement, play through movement. And then finally, the storyteller. They like to get lost in books or watch movies or tell their own stories. So those are the play personalities. My invite to folks is because this opens up new dimensions for folks that maybe they didn't even think of. So to go through them and say, ooh, I'm curious. So now we're following, I like to say, be childlike, not childish. Now we're following childlike wonder of being curious about something. And again, what's an experiment that you can do?
I love that. I think the three final categories are where I said, yeah, it's interesting to think about this. Thank you. Oh, Gary, I wish we had more time, but I want to be respectful of your time. We need to start wrapping it up. So, I guess, the final question on the topic is, what is one question that I should have asked you about the importance of play at work that I haven't?
And this is something that we often overlook is how can I play if I don't have the capacity to play? Because oftentimes we think like, oh, it's just easy, just do it. Often we're overwhelmed, overstimulated, and it's not possible to play. I've come to that realization multiple times myself. And in that case, what we need is rest. Rest is the thing that's going to fuel us so that we can play. And when I talk about rest, there are three types of rest that, again, everything is multidimensional. Most people don't think about these things. So we think about like rest as in getting sleep. That is essential. That's the first place to look. Are you getting quality sleep? Now, I'm not one to say that you need 8 hours a day. Again, I have small kids. It's like, it's not possible. I try. However, what I've been working on is ensuring that I get quality sleep. And that, that means having a wind down. That means ensuring that the area that I'm sleeping is conducive to good rest to allow me to get deep sleep. So that's the first thing. And that's macro rest. The other thing, which is important to the people listening and watching this, is the micro rest. This is the rest in between important moments, and so this type of rest could be play as a form of rest, or it could be your brain is just fried. You've been exerting it, and so maybe you need to take a nap. Again, that's something that's sort of frowned upon. However, there's a lot of research, just like with research with play, of the benefits of it, of taking a quick nap, 25 minutes. And maybe you don't necessarily go to sleep. I personally like to use like a guided 25-minute guided meditation. So like it's sort of like I get into that dreamlike state, but I don't necessarily fall asleep. And then I come back feeling rejuvenated. And then the third is called mezzo. And what that means is stepping away from the work. I know that's challenging for some. Yes, it would be nice to be able to step away like on an extended vacation. But I like to say, can you step away for like 2 hours? For me, that mezzo rest was an improv class that I had once a week. And then it became, as I'm more into what I'm doing now, I have the liberty that it's Friday afternoons. And then I'm aiming for, being able to take a sabbatical. So that's where we get that our creative juices flowing again. So that's something again most people don't think about.
I know that I said that it's going to be the last one, but this really triggered my curiosity because this is an issue that a lot of people face, talking about the meso and taking breaks from work. In theory, most people work just 5 days per week. But I think the reality is that very often we do a little bit of email or a little bit of little something something that needs to be done on a Saturday or on Sunday. What is your take on this, and how important do you think it is for us to restrain from doing that so that we can come back to work refreshed? I don't know if you know if there's any research on that. And it's a genuine question. I'm not trying to guide this anywhere. But personally, I have to say, I struggle with not working during the weekends. And I feel like it's probably not having that bad of an impact on me. But am I delusional?
So it goes back to the experiment. I think they're starting to get more and more research on this, especially as the topic of burnout is becoming a widespread conversation. That's something that we need to tackle. Everything starts with I'm just going to do a little bit here. I'm just going to do a little bit here. And then we have this new baseline where we think like, oh, I'm fine. And the question is, are we as good as we can do? And the other question is, are these things that we call ourselves doing, is it really helping in the long term? Or is it just us dealing with an anxiety because we think that we're going to miss out or someone is going to be upset? Again, it's something you're absolutely right. It's something that I'm questioning myself. And so it's all about an experiment of like, you know what? Let me experiment with not doing email on the weekends. So, what needs to happen in order for that to work? Maybe we need better systems in place so that when we come back on Monday, we're not, dealing with it. Or what I have a practice of doing is not doing email on the weekends unless it's urgent, but taking time on Sunday to sort of process things. And then that way I'm more present and more alert. But it's an experiment. I personally, anecdotally, feel like it helps.
Yeah. And I suppose that, every person is different. So I really value this thought of running an experiment and really saying what works for you. Because, for example, my husband, he refuses to not to look at his email during vacation because he said, when I come back to the office and have more than 1,000 emails sitting in my inbox, it's just so stressful that I lose all the positive impact of having taken a vacation. So he prefers to check in on regular basis, and really feels like it works for him better than not doing it. So probably, yeah, each.
Yeah, to each own. And one thing that I have yet to implement it, but I saw someone do it, and it did not change my perception of them in the slightest. They went on vacation, and their out of office said that they're on vacation, and if it's urgent, to reply back with urgent in the subject line, because when they get back, they're going to archive everything else and only deal with the things that are replied urgent. And I saw that, and I was like, kudos, bravo. He had mentioned, follow back. I will be back here. Follow back with me here. And I just made a note. All right, cool. Check back with them there. I didn't reply back urgent because it wasn't urgent. It was something that could wait. Again, I applauded this person. I'm like, man, I wish I had the courage to do that. Again, not everyone has the ability to do that.
Yeah, true. I had something similar, which was even more extreme and radical. Someone had in their autoresponder the following message. They said, I'm on vacation. All of the emails that I receive during this period are going to be deleted. So if you want me to reply to this, please email me after the second date. So basically he asked people to send him an email, a new email regarding this issue on a specific date. And he said that what it did was a lot of problems solved themselves. And he got way less emails after he came back from vacation. So if you can do that, why not? I agree. Gary, we have something that we call rapid fire questions on the show. And as the name indicates, the idea is that I'll ask you a few questions in rapid succession, and you'll try to answer all of them in under 2 minutes. It's a bit like quick that we did before recording. Okay, great. So, question number one: how do you define company culture?
Company culture are the habits, the rituals, and behaviors of the team.
And what are the signs that a company has a really toxic culture?
Where folks cannot bring their true self, so they're masking their behavior. We start to see sort of engagement drop, so people aren't participating willingly. People start leaving.
Do you admire any companies for their culture? And if yes, what are they?
One of the companies I admire for their culture is a company called Menlo Innovations. They are a developmental shop based out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, in the United States. Richard Sheridan is their CEO. He wrote an amazing book called Chief Joy Officer, and he talked all about their culture and the experiments that they run to optimize that. So that's one that I don't know of personally, but I read about them, love them. The other one is in my sort of marketing world. I had the pleasure of sort of interacting with them. They're called Sear Interactive. Their CEO, Will Reynolds, practices what he preaches as far as being a leader that is open to experimentation, helping his team, putting his team first, and the culture is definitely thriving because of it.
Amazing. And speaking of books, you've mentioned Chief Joy Officer. What other books? And it could be on culture, leadership, or anything else, really, even novels, philosophy, but books that you believe our listeners would benefit from.
The first two that comes to mind, Culture Code, amazing book. We know all
Yeah,
about
we
that.
had Dan on the show.
And then the other one is Creativity Inc. It's about Pixar, and
Catmull. Yeah,
great book.
amazing. Well, Gary, thank you so very much for coming here and for having this conversation with me and sharing all your wisdom about the importance of play in the workplace. If people want to learn more about you, about your work, about your book, what are the best online places for folks to visit?
Yeah, you can go to my website, breakthroughplay.com. Has a number of musings and whatnot there, or find me on LinkedIn, Gary Ware, or any other social at Gary Ware. I love talking about culture. I love talking about play and playfulness. Happy to take any questions that you have for me.
Amazing, Gary. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Sound producer, Heather McPherson, Twisted Spur Media.
Bella Silvani, production coordinator.
Thank you for spending your time with Gary and me on this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found this chat insightful, inspiring, or useful, and I'm guessing you did since you're still here, please do me a favor, take a few seconds to share this episode and have a chat with someone about what you learned. Because when podcasts like this spark conversations and those conversations turn into actions, that's when we start making real changes in the workplace together. And if you're looking to dig deeper into these topics and connect with others who are shaping the culture within the organizations, consider joining Culture Brain. We put together a cohort of the best, most ambitious culture leaders to help them accelerate progress in their culture work. To find out more and apply, head over to tinyurl.com/culturebrain. The link is in the show notes. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to get free resources on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: agabayer.com/resources. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, please do it now. That's the best way you can support our work. And finally, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on the platform that you listen to. Thank you, and you are amazing for listening to this point. Not many people do.